Darkwood, one of the scariest, most unforgiving horror games I've ever played. It's also one of the most intriguing as most of the lore is not outright explained to you, so a lot of the story you'll have to find out for yourself through context clues and dialogue. There's also a lot of mystery surrounding other parts of the game, which prompted me to make this video in the first place. After finishing my first playthrough of the game a few months ago, I know I'm quite late to the party. I was left with a lot of questions, so I decided to scour the internet for lore videos and essays to feed my curiosity. It was around this time that I stumbled upon an Iceberg chart made by the redditor Harrison Woolard. The dude is pretty active on the Darkwood subreddit and seems pretty knowledgeable, so I looked further into the chart. Many of these entries go into the lore of the game, and some even reference cut content, which I always love to see. Now, pretty much all of the info that I gathered comes from the Darkwood wiki, the subreddit, and even some Steam community posts, so all credit goes to those guys who are active on there. Especially Harrison, who made the Iceberg and even answered a couple of my questions that I had about some of the entries. So I'm going to assume you know how an Iceberg chart works since they're, well, some of the most popular videos on this entire site. But if not, I'll give you a simple explanation. We start from the top where the entries will either be very well known or common knowledge, and as we get deeper, the entries will get more and more obscure. And one last thing, I'm going to be spoiling a shit ton of the game here. Pretty much all of it. So if you want to go in as blind as possible, which I highly recommend, then please just go play the game and then come back here when you're done. It's not very long. Or if you've already played the game or just don't mind, then sit back and relax, and without further ado, let's get started. Acid Wizard Studio. It was founded on March 1st, 2013, and is made up of Artur Cortez, responsible for the art direction, sound, and music of the game, Jacob Kutz, who is responsible for the game's animations, and Gustav
Stachaszewski,
who was the programmer and the team's manager. He also worked on the marketing of the game. They're most known for their breakout hit, Darkwood, which was crowdfunded on Indiegogo in 2013, where it raised over $50,000. The game was released a year later through Steam Early Access, and then again in 2017 as a fully finished game. What you might not know, however, is that after finishing the game, they actually released it to the Pirate Bay, which was a site used for torrenting things such as movies and games. This was so that everyone could play the game. Their only request that if a person playing it liked it enough to buy it in the future, even if it was on sale. They really only requested that you try to stay away from buying it through a key seller, as they claimed those are the true people hurting the games industry. Since then, they've actually released another game called Soccer Kids, which is a tactical RPG soccer game. A little bit of a genre switch. And so far, that seems to be all that they've developed. Well, unless you count their entry for the 2013 Global Game Jam. Oh, and I almost forgot the most important member of the team, Sarek. Biomes. Biomes are large areas bordered by impassable woods, each with different locations and increasingly difficult enemy types. Each biome also contains a unique hideout location, as well as paths that lead to other adjacent biomes. The four main ones you'll encounter throughout the game are the Dry Meadow, the Silent Forest, the Old Woods, and lastly, the Swamp, the game's final location. The Wedding. The Wedding is a major location/event which takes place in the Dry Meadow. And while technically you can visit this place anytime after navigating the Cord Maze before it, you'll need an invitation to gain access to the main building, which you can get through a night event where someone will knock on your door, and if you answer it, there will be an invitation with a code on it. After getting to the area and then killing the dog out front and entering the padlock code, you'll be greeted by a dancing ghost bride. Venturing further in, you'll be able to find the groom with a radio next to him. He tells the player, "We've been waiting for you," while banging his head on the table after every word. If you make your way towards the top of the room, there will be a door which leads out back to several other ghostly brides dancing, inviting the player to dance with them. Upon returning to the main hall, the door will shut and lock behind you, and the power will go out. You'll then hear another metal door being forced in by something, screaming the same thing told to you by the groom. Suddenly, the lights will turn on and a red chomper in a wedding dress will attack you. It's not required for you to kill it, but if you do, you'll be rewarded with fabric and a shiny stone. After escaping, the main door will lock, making returning back inside impossible. The Sow. The Sow is a giant mutated pig that the villagers have kept locked up in their pig shed in the Silent Forest. She is the primary source of food for the villagers who rely on the Sow's offspring as meat. However, when you visit the pig shed, you'll find that the Sow has been slowly starving because nobody has been able to feed her since the death of the pig farmer. Because of this, she hasn't been able to produce any pigs, which has left the village in a famine. You can either choose to ignore her, which won't have any effect on the story, or you can choose to kill her, which definitely will, as killing her will send the village into a state of hysteria, where they will begin to beg and pray for its resurrection. Killing the Sow will also give you a hotbar upgrade if you talk to the Wolfman after, since he wants it dead. Hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are consumables which can be cooked in ovens in exchange for essence. This includes items such as mushrooms, odd meats, embryos, and even dead rats. You can use the extracted essence to acquire new abilities, such as the ability to see farther, or even the ability to eat wood to restore health. The Pretty Lady. The Pretty Lady is a minor character and sister to the Chicken Lady. She's a gigantic and mutated woman who is covered up by a blanket in the locked room of the Chicken Lady's house. If standing outside her window, you can even hear her wheezing and briefly see her twisting and turning under the covers of her bed. In one of the dream sequences, you can see the Pretty Lady, the Chicken Lady, and their brother Janek all gathered around by the doctor as they beg him to treat her. The doctor, unfortunately, was unable to do anything except bind her arms, as by this point she had developed cannibalistic tendencies from the plague. This is also the reason why she's locked away in the Chicken Lady's house. The Pretty Lady's fate is in the player's hands depending on who he gives the key covered in chicken feces to. If given to the musician, nothing really happens to her. But if given to the Wolfman, the Pretty Lady can be found later in the game, her half-eaten corpse, laying in the barn ruins located in the old woods. Shiny Stones. Shiny stones are a valuable trade item which can be found in most parts of the game. They are usually invisible but can be seen if illuminated with some type of light source, such as a flashlight or a lantern. Their purpose is to be sold to vendors, which awards you 130 reputation, making it a great source of the game's currency. Not only can you find them randomly on the ground, but they can also be left outside your hideout during night events, as well as be found in or close by to shrines. As to what these stones actually are, it's said that they're shards that rain down during the being's arrival, likely thrown up in the air and scattered throughout the woods after the meteor landed. This can also be suggested by the painting that seems to resemble the being's arrival. Odd Meat. Odd Meat is a hallucinogen dropped by rabbits, huge dogs, chompers, and many of the other monsters throughout the game. It can be cooked in the oven to gain essence, or it can be consumed to give the player the endurance and armor buff for 150 seconds. This item has an expiration timer though, and when it's up, it'll become a rotten mushroom. Dream Sequences. Dream sequences are brief sections of the game that usually provide the player with some type of story background or lore. They can be experienced after taking a dose of essence or entering some type of story event. In total, there are about 7 dream sequences, or 8 if you count the Indiegogo one. Artur Cortez. As previously mentioned before, Artur Cortez is one of the main developers at Acid Wizard Studio, and was responsible for the art direction, sound, and music of the game. He was also present during the Reddit AMA, and provided some more information about the game's lore that was either missed or not entirely covered in the actual game. I'm not really sure why he's mentioned again here, since the studio itself is already mentioned on this layer, so if there's something else that I missed, please let me know. Chompers. This refers specifically to the red chompers, which are some of the most difficult and aggressive enemies in the entire game. They are extremely dangerous and attack on sight. They also resemble humans that have gone through the final stages of the plague. Their bodies split in half, starting from their head all the way down to their chest. There are rows of teeth inside their gaping wound, making it resemble a giant mouth. You can actually witness this transformation if you find them in a dormant state, as getting too close to them will trigger their mutation, so it's best to dispose of them quickly. Occasionally, you can actually split these creatures in half, where it will still proceed to chase you, crawling with its upper portion. It's highly recommended to avoid these things early on in your playthrough, until you've obtained a gun or some type of powerful melee weapon like an axe or shovel. The Talking Tree. The talking tree is a major character and a gigantic amalgamation of different people into a singular horrific form created by the being. The tree is composed of all types of men, women, children, and even what looks to be a cow. Under the talking tree, in the basement, is its heart, which beats to a steady rhythm. Apparently, the beings that make up this tree are clones that were formed from the being's lifeblood known as the white substance. It's speculated that this took place during the raid on the village's basement by the thief and his companions in search for food. These clones are a mix of the villagers that were locked in and out of the basement during the raid. This is inferred because if the player chooses to break off a branch, which are basically its limbs, from the tree, it will grow back immediately. Most of the tree's people just cry in anger and agony, but there seems to be one person who appears situationally aware enough to direct the player towards the radio tower, a future location in the game. This is because the tree blocks the player from progressing as it stands in the way of the road home. Alternatively, you have the option of burning the tree down and killing it, which can be done after accessing the basement and locating its heart. Here you can find a large oil tank, and that, combined with a torch, can send the tree into a writhing agony. It takes the rest of the day and night to burn, and during the night the player will be attacked relentlessly by burning villagers. The next morning you'll notice the absence of the tree, and making your way back to where the tree once stood, you'll find its ashes. Then you can continue along the path and find the road home. Piotrek's Rocket. Piotrek is a major character who is located in the Silent Forest. You can find him in his home where he has barricaded himself in his room. Trying to open the door, he'll shout at you that he won't open it until the beast inside his garage is gone. After killing the huge dog, he'll unlock the door and become a vendor for the protagonist. While searching his place, you can find a crude drawing of a rocket ship, which he explains are his blueprints. He'll tell you that he's been scavenging for parts while looking in broken tractors. You can actually collect the parts yourself and bring them to him. In total, there are 6 parts: a battery, a tire, a review mirror, a fan belt, an exhaust, and a steering wheel. Bringing 4 out of the 6 parts will allow him to build his rocket ship. In Chapter 2 of the game, you can find a crashed rocket in the junkyard. Upon searching it, you'll be able to find the charred remains of Piotrek. It can be speculated that his rocket didn't get there by flying necessarily, more like violently exploding and launching itself and him into the junkyard. Floor Gore. Floor Gore is a large red mass that pursues the player if he is outside during nightfall. It stops for no obstacles, and if it makes contact with the player, it'll rapidly drain his health until death. The only way to avoid it is to be inside your hideout, as the gases from the oven seem to repel the persistent mass. Floor Gore is likely to be the highly concentrated spores released by the being during nighttime. And while the spores are both in the air day and night, they seem to increase substantially during the night. Black Chompers. Black Chompers are extremely aggressive creatures that appear in dream sequences and in the prologue. They're shrouded in shadow and are stronger than the regular Chompers. It is heavily implied that they, or most of them, are actually humans instead of monsters, but are only perceived this way while the protagonist is under the effects of essence. They first appear in the prologue after the Doctor injects the protagonist with essence. In reality, though, they are actually the villagers who have come to kill the Doctor because of his inability to cure them from the plague. The next time you see one is in the church during a dream sequence where it will attack you after taking a strange box. Killing it with an axe and then returning to the location while awake, you'll find the corpse of a man chopped in half. Equally, taking the box and then escaping will result in the man calling you a thief when you return. In the train wreck dream, the protagonist is yelled at by black chompers who are actually the Doctor in reality interrogating him. Bike Man drinks all your alcohol. The Bike Man is a character whose purpose is to transport your items from various hideouts. He can be summoned with a bike bell found in the Silent Forest hideout on the workbench. After ringing the bike bell and waiting a few seconds, you'll hear the sound of another bike bell from outside your hideout. Talk to him and he'll tell you how thirsty he is. If given alcohol, he offers to transport all of your items stored in any of your hideouts over to your current one. This is how his service is used. In the future, if you want to move your items around again, you'll have to give him another bottle of alcohol. But if you have any extra bottles of alcohol in your hideout you tell him to transfer your stuff from, you'll find that they will all be consumed by him during the journey, leaving you with nothing but empty bottles. Antec.
Antek is a red chomper who was likely a regular villager before his transformation. If the player chooses to kill the sow, another villager will tell him that the mayor wishes to speak with him. Going to the mayor's house, you are led into the basement, where a door will be locked behind you. Two other villagers will then release a red chomper named Antek in retaliation. The only choice a player has is to kill all of them and escape the cellar. The Being. Okay, I know I mentioned this thing in a few of the other earlier entries, so let's actually talk about what it is. The Being crashed as part of a meteor in August 1975 in a valley located in a forest known as Darkwood, in Poland. The Being is an immensely powerful eldritch entity who serves as the antagonist of the entire game. It's literally the reason for most of the events in the game happening, and the reason that the forest is the way it is. It only makes its appearance in the epilogue, where it looks to be located in a canyon overgrown by tree roots, also surrounded by sleepers and corpses. Physically, it resembles a heart and constantly emits a fog-like gas which covers it. It's worshipped by the humans who have had their minds taken over because of it, though aside from consuming humans and spreading its influence, its true nature and motives are unclear. Its lifeblood is white substance, which has the ability to copy and replicate as any human, animal, or even object. In fact, the trees that cover the entire forest are mostly fake, as they're only copies of the real ones that existed in the forest when the Being first arrived. Now, to be honest, there's so much more I could talk about with this entry, but trying to go over the entire lore of the Being would take an extremely long time. So if you're curious and want a more in-depth explanation, you can read about it on the Darkwood wiki, or there's an extensive Steam community post which goes over the entire lore of the game. The Thief. The Thief was a villager who was a father to 7 children. When the Darkwood zone began to become infected with the plague, his wife took 4 of the children and left. However, he stayed in the village with his 3 remaining children. His 3 boys started to become very sick and starved due to what the father perceived as unfair food rationing. He was able to band together with some of the other disgruntled villagers, and they decided to raid the basement for food. However, the raid went wrong and the other villagers ended up turning on each other. Some of them were able to barricade themselves in the basement with the food, all except for the thief. He ended up getting locked outside with the angry mob of villagers. It's implied that in their fit of rage they killed him and banished his 3 sons. In his house, you're able to find the word thieves written on the floor, along with the photo of the 3 boys. The thief's sons are actually the 3. You'll encounter them in the swamp every morning if you've survived the night, and have the option of trading with them. Musician's parents. The musician's parents can be found in the creepy house located in the old woods. His mother used to be a violinist who shared a strong bond with him, as he hoped to one day follow in her footsteps. There isn't much known about his father, but it is known that he used to beat the musician with a belt. After the arrival of the plague, his parents started to become sick and immobile, which he misunderstood as them being angry with him. This caused him to run away from home. If the key covered in chicken feces is given to the musician, he'll send you to the house to give his mother a drawing and to retrieve his violin. You have the option to put the drawing in the mother's inventory, but if not done, both parents will transform into red chompers, making it harder to escape. Killing them will result in the musician crying over their deaths and will tell the player not to talk to him. Even though greatly upsetting him, it's the only way he lives in the true ending. Odd glowing mushrooms. So I think this entry is talking about the glowing mushrooms, which are variants of the old-looking mushrooms. Anyway, these give 20 essence or can be eaten to heal 80 HP over 30 seconds, with the perk Mushroom Healing. Unlike the odd-looking mushrooms, this mushroom can't be used to craft antidotes. There's not really much more to say about this one. Wedding Ring. Fake. The fake wedding ring is dropped by the Wolfman, and seems to be connected to the real silver wedding ring, which can be found in the Chicken Lady's house. It's speculated that the Wolfman and the Pretty Lady were either married or engaged before the plague, as they both have or are close by to wedding rings. The Wolfman also has a very unique interest in the Pretty Lady, asking the player to bring him the key to her room in his questline. It's also speculated that the Wolfman could have had a relationship with the Chicken Lady, but longed for an extramarital affair, as in the game he detests her. The fake part of the ring comes from its description, that calls it a bad imitation. It goes on to describe it as colorless, rough, and uneven. The reason that this ring is fake is because it is only a copy of the real one made by the white substance of the forest. The Wolfman, who is the wearer, is also an imitation of the hunter, who used to live in the forest before the plague. We killed Janek. Janek is the chicken lady's brother. You encounter him in the doctor's house in the prologue of the game, as he's in the room you unlock. He begs for you to open the door, and when you do, he attacks you without warning, probably expecting you to be the doctor. Naturally, you cave his head in with a table leg. Looting his corpse, you find a plastic chicken given to him by his sister. This is also the character that appears in the train sequence dream, with the chicken lady and the pretty lady. Hanuska's charred husband. Hanuska is an old woman who can be found in the village located beyond the Silent Forest. She sits in her chair inside the ruins of her house. She won't acknowledge the player until he walks away from her, where she can be heard saying, "Kill the pig." This is a reference to what she did to the village. She is the one responsible for the village's famine, as she was the one who cut the cables for stunning the sow, so it couldn't be fed. This is also what got the pig farmer killed. If Hanuska is killed, she will drop a knife and cables, which confirms this. The reason she did this was to punish the other villagers for what they did to her. At some point in the past, Hanuska would give birth to a baby, which the villagers deemed an abomination. They were so horrified by the child that they stole it from her and threw it down their village well. The child can actually be found in the well, though it has turned into a smaller red chomper and carries a doll. Not stopping there, they would go on to set her house ablaze, burning it down and killing her husband who was still inside. Surek. Surek is the name of the protagonist's dog, which can be seen in the epilogue of the game. This is a small Easter egg, as Surek is also the name of the real-life pet dog of Acid Wizard Studios. Cottage C Chest Key. Cottage C is a small cottage that can be found in the Silent Forest. The only way to get inside is through a tunnel leading through the thicket. Only 2 rooms are accessible. One of them has a shelf which contains a small caliber magazine and some bread. On the floor is a corpse where a chest key can be found. When the player takes it, a villager will call him a fucking thief from behind a door to another room. If approached, the player will be immediately attacked. This chest key unlocks the crate in the generator room of the Silent Forest hideout. The crate contains a metal pipe and a watch, which is an extremely useful item as it tells you the time of day. Village Cannibal. In the village beyond the Silent Forest, a house can be found with all of its doors locked, but its windows left open. Entering the house, you'll be able to find a bunch of jars of meat along with a bone. You can also find a meat grinder with a room filled with dead bodies next door. There is a villager who sits and keeps to himself, being passive towards the player. He'll tell you to take anything you fancy, but not to tell anyone. It's heavily speculated that this man is a cannibal of the village, or at least the house he's in belongs to them. It makes sense because of the large amount of meat you find, even though the village is going through a famine, or, the room filled with dead bodies. Especially since he tells you not to tell anybody about what you find in the house. This villager could have been a butcher who decided to turn to eating other humans when the food supply of the village ran out. Developer Apartment. The Developer Apartment is a dream sequence which the player can randomly encounter after any dose of essence, as long as he has already taken the first dose. It's only available if the Indiegogo content is enabled. Disabling that option will also disable the dream sequence and prevent it from happening. In the dream, the player walks down a long hallway where he'll be able to open one of the doors. Going inside, you'll be able to view many different objects, including concept art, pictures of the developers and their friends and family, and even a personal thank you from the team themselves. The only way to leave this dream is to read the book containing the names of the Indiegogo backers. This dream sequence doesn't serve a purpose for the story or anything, but it's just a nice and fun inclusion from the developers to really show their appreciation. Oddstone. The Oddstone was a rare material used for crafting the gray and red potions. I say was because since Alpha 3 both have been removed from the game. However, even though the potions have been removed, you can actually still find the Oddstone in the doctor's house and sell it to vendors for a decent amount of reputation. Sparing the doctor's dog. In the prologue of the game, before you play as the protagonist, you play as the doctor. When leaving your house, you'll be able to find his dog outside, on the brink of death. The doctor remarks that it'll soon be dead, and laments over putting it out of its misery. Walking further, you'll come across an axe. After picking it up, you can choose to continue right away on the path, or you can head back and use it to kill your dog. Whether you do this or not will have a minor effect on the game later on. When you come back to the doctor's house later in the game as the protagonist, you won't have any enemies to deal with. That is, unless you didn't kill the dog in the prologue. If the dog is left alive, it'll mutate into a huge dog and attack the player, where the only option is to now kill it. You'll also have to deal with the huge dog if you choose to skip the prologue. Banshee Stillborn. In the Dry Meadow hideout, you can experience a special night event, which are basically rare or uncommon occurrences that happen during the night. This involves a non-hostile banshee sitting inside or near your hideout, emitting a red glow. If you approach it, it'll spread its wings like usual, but it won't scream. Instead, it'll vanish into a murder of crows, leaving behind an item only marked with a question mark. Further inspecting it will reveal it to be a barely pulsating thing that resembles a child. This is basically a stillbirth. You can actually consume it, although why the fuck would you? For health regeneration. You can also convert it into essence using the oven. In the game files, this item is referred to as piskel, which is Polish for chick. And seeing how the banshees resemble crows, or at least some type of bird, it's pretty much confirmed that this question mark item is a fetus. Full Moon Event. Now, this entry could be referring to one of two things. The first one is what the Darkwood wiki calls a full moon, which is when the spawning of dogs and huge dogs is drastically increased, signaled by a sudden change in ambient music which loops until sunrise and is recognized by a howling sound, or it can be referring to a community post which was made by the user vZachary all the way back in 2015, where they proposed a random occurrence dubbed the Full Moon Event. This would be an event where the player could venture out of their hideout at night with some light illuminating them instead of the usual pitch blackness. There also would be a new kind of monster, which would be blind and only respond to sound. During the event, the player could harvest tons of mushrooms while sneaking past the monsters. If found though, these new monsters could summon another monster, most likely one that was already in the game, that would fight the player. If the player managed to survive and make it to the Wolfman's camp during the event before dawn, they would be treated to special items as part of the Wolf's once in a full moon special offer. This post was actually pretty interesting, not only because of the concept, but because the dev team would actually comment on the post itself, stating, "To be honest, this was supposed to be added in Alpha 3, as we experimented a lot with these kinds of nights. We had to cut it back though, as we would need much more stuff changed in a full moon night to make it cool, but it will most probably get added in the future." Although, unfortunately, to this day, a full moon event such as the one that was proposed by vZachary has not yet been added into the game. Imperfect replicas. Replicas are formed by the white substance, which is part of the being. They are labeled imperfect because when they are created, they have slight differences to their appearance compared to their original counterpart, such as the ring that was previously mentioned. The replica is colorless, rough, and uneven compared to the real thing. You can also see this in the Wolfman character you meet. He is supposed to be a replica of the hunter, but was fused with one of his trophies, a wolf head, which is why he has a canine appearance. Doctor's Instructions number 3. These are the third part of the doctor's instructions for combating the plague. They can be found by either killing the chicken lady and looting her corpse, or presenting her with the bloody shaw, found on the dead body of the pretty lady, where in turn, she will give them to you. The note contains his methods for treating the pretty lady. It reads, "Remove growths using a sterilized knife, washed in spirits or boiled. In case the wounds or ulcers open, put bean seeds inside. And under no circumstances, untie the hands and legs. In case of emergency, you'll find the path to my home in the edge of the old woods." The end of the note will also reveal the location of the doctor's home if you haven't found it already. Heartbeat Event. This is a special night event where a heartbeat sound can be heard when inside your hideout. In addition to this, the floor of the hideout will begin to leak blood and patches of grass outside will disappear, revealing pulsating flesh underneath, possibly representing how the entire forest itself is alive thanks to the being. For now, the event is only confirmed to happen in the hideouts of the Old Woods and the Dry Meadow. The Toy. The toy is a miscellaneous item that resembles a rocket which can be found in the doctor's house inside of a locked crate. However, this thing is completely useless. You can't even sell it to anyone for any reputation. It seems like it would have been used to unlock some type of dialogue between Piotrek or the doctor or someone, the same way the photo of the road home does, although right now, it's nothing but a mystery. Sabotaging Piotrek. When meeting Piotrek, you have the ability of helping him build his rocket and achieve his dreams of flying into space. However, you also have the option of sabotaging his rocket. This can be done by showing any of the tractor parts to the Wolfman, where he will then turn it into a bomb. You can then present this bomb to Piotrek and he'll use it as part of his rocket, though this does have a small effect on the story in Chapter 2. Later on, you won't be able to find his crashed rocket in the junkyard since it presumably exploded before he even had a chance to take off. With the rocket not crashing into the junkyard, the enemies won't be scared off, resulting in more of them being present. There will also be less resources since you won't be able to loot his body or the rocket. As for why the Wolfman wants to sabotage Piotr, it's not really known. It could be that he detests him for his innocence, which contrasts with the Wolfman's cold and callous view of the world. Or it could be that he hates him because Piotr claimed to once own a plastic chick, the same one the chicken lady gave to her brother, and the Wolfman hates the chicken lady, and based on this theory, anyone relating to her in any kind of way. Shedding body parts. I think this refers to the ability that the player has to see his exact location on the map once a day. You can do this by leaving a piece of flesh on the ground, which is indicated by a red cross on your map. However, there is no way to pick these pieces of yourself up as they disappear the next day. The Scarecrow. The Scarecrow can be found during the Road Home section of the game, and is actually wearing the old clothes of the protagonist. Before the prologue of the game, the protagonist was a soldier who was sent to the forest of Darkwood to study the being. While residing at one of the campsites with some others of the group, he was attacked by a pack of savages. If you venture back to this area later in the game, you'll be able to find dead soldiers, with 2 of them being tied up to trees. You'll also notice a 3rd tree that has a bloody rope lying at the base of it, hinting that whoever was tied to it escaped their captivity. This was the protagonist, who somehow managed to escape and then for unknown reasons switched his attire for the Scarecrow's, perhaps attempting to blend in. That's why when looking at the Scarecrow, you'll see it wearing a hazmat suit. In the genocide ending of the game, the player is referred to as a monster in a Scarecrow's disguise, alluding to this narrative. Genocide endings. Speaking of, the genocide ending provides a different outcome for the protagonist if he kills everyone he meets during the game. If you obtain the bliss ending, then the text for the protagonist says, "From then on, wooden crosses covered with a coat and hat started appearing in the woods." They were usually accompanied by 3 black, beakless, dead crows. The inhabitants of the woods believed these symbols protected them from a scarecrow lurking between the trees, silently taking the lives of everyone he encountered. If you obtain the burn them all ending instead, the ending text reads, "And the vagabond from outside the woods, the monster in a scarecrow's disguise, who, due to reasons known only to himself, killed everyone who crossed him." Cropfield dog. You can find a crop field in the dry meadow, with vegetation so tall it obscures most of the light. It's arranged like a maze, with dead ends and small openings the player can squeeze through to continue. Reaching the end of the maze, you'll find a crate with some pretty good items inside, like a lantern. However, once you're done collecting your prize, you better be prepared to fight or run like hell, because a huge dog will spawn right outside ready to attack. Dogs in the church basement. The church basement can be found in the church ruins in the old woods. You might recognize this place from one of the dream sequences. At the end of the dream, you're attacked by a black chomper. Whether you kill it or die to it will dictate which enemies spawn in the basement. Dying to it, which most people probably did, will spawn red chompers in the basement. However, if you manage to kill the black chomper in the dream sequence, there will be a pack of huge dogs instead, feasting on the plague-ridden corpses, and these enemies are much easier to deal with. Embryo grants another life. The embryo is a hallucinogenic item. Usually you would cook it to gain essence, but in hard mode it can be consumed to grant the player another life, as in this mode you have a limited number of lives. The player has 4 lives to start, with 7 being the cap. Corpses location. I think this entry is talking about the circle of corpses that can be found in the old woods. They're usually guarded by red chompers because you can find some pretty good loot there. The only other thing I can think of would be the corpses that are bound to trees that you can find throughout the game. Or maybe the corpses that are hidden in the crop mazes. Other than that, I'm not really too sure what this entry could mean. Nightly Ritual Event. I'm pretty sure this entry is referring to the nightly sacrifices that can take place outside of the Silent Forest hideout. During the night, you'll hear a muffled growl, to which then you'll see a corpse with the lower half of a human and the top half being some kind of animal. It's unknown if this creature was created by the forest or perhaps fused together by the savages that inhabit it. The corpse will then be set on fire, creating a ring around it. The ring will also have markings around it similar to the ones that can be found in other parts of the woods. It's not really known what significance the sacrifices contribute. Perhaps it's a bad omen, or a threat of some sort. The traitor is our replica. The traitor is a major character who saves the protagonist from the Doctor in the prologue. He shares similar characteristics with the protagonist, such as being roughly the same height. The protagonist even remarks that his face does look familiar. He'll appear in your hideout after surviving the night, and offer you quite a large selection of items to trade with. He is capable of speech, but you won't be able to make out anything he says, due to the large helmet that's on his head, that looks like it's almost fused with his body. So instead, he'll communicate with you through his body language and writing on his glove with charcoal. The traitor is someone that you'll form a pretty strong bond with, as it seems like he's always looking out for you. He even begs you not to leave after you find the key to door number 21. After traveling to the swamp in Chapter 2, you'll be able to find his corpse near your hideout. It seems he was killed trying to follow you. Inspecting his body, you'll find him carrying a journal, and the same key the protagonist was carrying in the prologue when the Doctor found him. Except both of these items are wrong. The journal is covered in growths and mushrooms, and the key appears to be warped and disfigured. This is because the items are replicas, much like the traitor himself, all created by the being. If you remember, the protagonist was actually in the woods before the prologue of the game. He was part of the camp that ended up being attacked, and he was tied up to a tree. This is most likely where the being began to make an imprint of his character. After the protagonist escaped his capture, he swapped his clothes with the Scarecrow. This is why the traitor has on the hazmat suit. It's the old attire from the protagonist, which you can actually see on the Scarecrow. It also explains why the suit is basically fused to the traitor, and why the player even recognizes him so well. It's not known what killed the traitor on his way to the swamp. One of the speculations is that it could have been the protagonist himself. This is supported by the word liar being written on the helmet of his severed head, as when he finds his corpse, he doesn't seem to recognize him anymore. It makes sense, as the traitor is a copy, or false imitation, if you will, of the protagonist himself. Bodies of the Doctor's family. Unfortunately, I'm kind of at a loss here with this entry, so I'm just going to attempt to provide some type of explanation of it, and run with some theories. To my knowledge, you never actually find the bodies of the Doctor's family. Honestly, their entire fate remains a complete mystery. The Doctor is actually an outsider, but he was in the forest of Darkwood before the plague. Approximately 10 years ago, he was sent here for some type of work, but ended up staying to try and cure the disease that was beginning to infect the local population. Eventually, the plague would become so bad that the Doctor's family, which consisted of his wife and daughter, would be evacuated and the area was quarantined. Now, later in the game, you can find a helicopter crash. Investigating the crash site, you'll be able to come across someone who is carrying the other half of the Doctor's family photograph, which shows the Doctor himself. The people in the helicopter were most likely coming to evacuate the Doctor before something went wrong and they crashed. Now, this is a complete speculation, but one could infer that perhaps this helicopter was not traveling to Darkwood, but was actually traveling away from the forest. There is nothing that suggests that this helicopter crash is recent, so maybe it could have actually been the helicopter responsible for evacuating the Doctor's wife and daughter. This can also explain why you'll find the other half of the same family picture the Doctor has. Perhaps it was taken by his wife to remember him by, as both were unaware when he would be able to return to the outside world. Now, the only bodies you'll find here are that of soldiers, not the Doctor's family. So, unfortunately, their fate remains unknown. Dead Elephant Child. In the swamp area of Chapter 2, you'll come across a house consisting of a mother and her 2 children. They're dressed in hazmat suits, accompanied with gas masks and oxygen tanks. They're called the elephants because of the long, trunk-like hose that connects their masks to their oxygen tanks. Talking to the mother, she'll reveal that one of her other children has run away to his grandmother's house. This would make them a family of 4. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that the thief had a wife who took 4 of her kids away with her, leaving him and the 3 other children. So yes, the family you find here is the rest of the family of the thief, his wife and children. Except when you find and return her runaway child, that only makes up 3 children. So where's the 4th child she took with her? Well, located near the house, there's an old shed. The door is locked, but you'll find the code by listening to her runaway child recite a children's rhyme. Unlocking the door and venturing inside, you'll find a body decomposing in the tub, with an oxygen tank next to it. Examining the body, the protagonist will remark that it's a decaying corpse, probably that of a young boy. Yeah, this is the final child of the family. I'm unsure how the child died, and I don't think it mentions it anywhere. It's just kind of there without any real explanation. Though perhaps he had succumbed to the infection of the plague. Savage Ritual Spots. Throughout the game, you'll be able to find ritual spots, which consist of a large area marked with strange signs, drawings, and other markings. Here, you'll sometimes be able to catch a glimpse of a vision of a key or the big metal door if standing in the perfect spot amongst the markings. However, the most interesting thing you'll find in some of these spots are the catalysts used to spawn enemies encountered throughout the game. In one spot, you'll find a corpse stuffed with lizards, and in another spot, you'll find a corpse surrounded by crows. These represent the Swamper and the Banshee creatures. They're the result of these rituals because of the power that the being has, since it's able to use its lifeblood to fuse things together in order to try and form a replica. Occasionally, you'll be able to find a savage in these spots, still drawing markings with a stick. Wolfman's Consultation Prize. If you chose to help out and give the key covered in chicken feces to the musician in Chapter 1, and not the Wolfman, at some point he'll invade your hideout and steal some items that you've stored in your workbench. He'll leave a note saying to come meet him in the sawmill if you want to get your stuff back. When you arrive at the sawmill, you'll make your way into a room where the Wolfman will tell you over the loudspeaker to leave all your stuff behind. I'm sure you can see where this is going. After emptying your inventory, the door to the room will lock, preventing you from escaping. The wolf will demand you provide him with some type of entertainment. You'll be given a table leg, a knife, and 2 pills, before 2 huge dogs ambush you, and you're left to defend yourself. Killing them, the Wolfman will burst through a metal door and charge at the player. He'll attempt to finish you off with his assault rifle. When he runs out of bullets, he'll toss his weapon aside and begin to lunge at you. If you're able to kill him, you'll be able to find the sawmill key on his corpse. Then you'll be able to reclaim your stolen items and get out of there. However, if you manage to fail and die from the attack, then all of your stolen items will be lost forever. Returning to the sawmill, you'll find a note inside your backpack along with a key to the sawmill. The note is from the Wolfman and says that your items are gone for good, but he's left you a consultation prize for your failed attempt. Unlocking the metal door with the key, you'll be able to find a big wrapped up gift. Opening it, you'll find shit. No, like, literally. That's your prize. It's one last big fuck you the Wolfman gives you before disappearing forever. Bedfellow. While occupying the dry meadow hideout, there is a chance a man will spawn on the edge of your bed. This can happen at night or in the morning during the time freeze. He looks to be distressed and says he wants to go home. He then says that we need to get away from here, like he's referring to himself and the player. He'll remain on the bed if the player stays close to him, but once you lose sight of him, he disappears. Interestingly, if you try to attack the man, you'll actually end up doing damage to yourself. This is because the bedfellow is actually the protagonist, although without his hat or coat on. This could mean that your mind is telling you not to trust everything that you may see when in the forest. Map to the Burn Cottage. The Burn Cottage is a major location in the swamp. Here you'll be able to find a mass grave marked with 3 crosses as well as photographs, one of them being a helicopter and the other being a village full of people. This is a tricky place to find though, because you'll need to use an oxygen tank to navigate through an underwater corridor. You can also find a map for it in the swamp village, which will display its location on your main map. Specifically, it's located in the house that has the word thieves marked on the floor. It'll be behind rubble, so you'll need a shovel to dig it out. We now know that this house belongs to the thief and his children, the same thief that was the husband to the elephant mother and father to the other children that she took with her. Snail Wellington Interaction. I think this entry is talking about the snail that can be found in the cottage near the junkyard in Chapter 2. After making your way up the path past all of the snail people, you'll come across a house with a giant shell embedded in its roof. You'll also find a snail that will retreat into its shell upon seeing the protagonist. If you break open the cracked underside of the shell, you'll be able to enter it and talk to him. You can actually talk with him quite a bit. He'll mention how ugly you are, seemingly unaware of the monster he has become himself. The reason he looks like this is because when he was a human, he resorted to eating snails out of starvation, which he would succumb to anyway. You can actually find his corpse intertwined with roots, where the forest would then reincarnate him through an imperfect copy of himself, fused with his last meal. The Wellington part of this entry comes from the rubber boots that you can find on a shelf in a shack near the Great Lake located in the swamp. In previous versions of the game, these boots were called Wellingtons, and then would have their name changed to Gumboots, which in British English are commonly used terms to describe these types of rubber boots. When equipping these boots in your hotbar, you're able to walk over infestations, or worms, as well as corpses and mushrooms. However, you'll still take damage if walking over corpses and mushrooms as you normally would. You just won't experience the debuff that comes with them. The rubber boots won't lose durability either. They only lose their durability when walking over worms, and currently there is no way to repair them. Okay, now that we've gotten all of those explanations out of the way, we can finally talk about the actual entry. When speaking to the snail, he'll mention that he's lost his gumboots. If you show him the rubber boots, he'll react positively, pleased that you have found them, but nothing more than that, unfortunately. As for why he even cares about the boots in the first place, it's heavily implied that the snail is ignorant of his current form and still believes himself to be human. The being is extraterrestrial. I already touched on this topic in the earlier entry when I explained the being, but I'll briefly go over it again. The being is an entity that crash-landed into the Darkwood forest from space. It sent shards of itself flying throughout the woods, and would then use the white substance, its lifeblood, to rapidly replicate the forest around it. It's also responsible for bringing forth a great plague due to the airborne spores it emits. There really isn't much known about the being, especially its backstory and where it came from. Honestly, it's kind of Lovecraftian, with it being an eldritch entity that, for all we know, has existed since time itself. Wooden Thicket, Trap. This is a minor location which can be found in the swamp. It's a dark area surrounded by overgrown trees, which causes it to be extremely cramped. There is an opening in the center of the thicket which contains a backpack. Around it are some chain traps, which really make you watch where you exit from. The reason that this area is a trap is because the backpack is used to lure you in, hoping you'll lower your guard. And before you know it, there will be a red chomper which will begin to attack you. The chain traps are there for you to get caught in, by mistake, while you make your escape from the monster. Sickles break barricades faster. Now, the sickle is not a very good weapon. However, it's not entirely useless. It's actually a pretty good tool for killing elk and banshee babies because of its unique double hit attack. Now, to my knowledge, the sickle doesn't actually break barricades faster, despite what this entry might say. To be honest, it might be the slowest weapon to break barricades, but it is the best. This is because the sickle only loses 1% durability when hitting non-living objects. So while other weapons might break right before or right after you break down a barricade, the sickle won't even lose half its durability. In fact, you could break down barricade after barricade using the same sickle, albeit extremely slowly. Dry Meadow Hideout Starting Crate. Outside of your first hideout, located in the Dry Meadow, you'll be able to find a locked crate. You can scour the entire biome for the code, but it won't do you any good. This is because the code was only given to people who backed the game on Indiegogo, when it was still in development. Fear not though, as you can actually still open the crate. The code has remained the same since release, which is 2919. The crate contains some items that will make your first few days easier to survive, such as gasoline, a single-shot pistol, fabric, and some nails and boards. While the supplies is pretty good, it won't help you for more than a few days, so eventually you'll still need to venture out into the woods to keep progressing. Unused Silent Forest Journal Entry. There is a cut journal entry pertaining to the Silent Forest, which looks like it would be written by the protagonist when first entering the forest. It reads, "I don't know this part of the forest too well. I need to be careful. They say fortune favors the prepared. Maybe I should check the underground passage first. It's marked on my map after all. That damn door better be opened." This entry is accompanied by a drawing of trees with multiple sets of eyes lurking in the darkness. Cottage A and B. Both cottages A and B are legacy cottages, meaning they have some type of importance to the game. Well, I should say had, because both have been removed from the game. Cottage A used to be located in the Dry Meadow and was a gateway location, which bridged that part of the forest to the Silent Forest. The cottage was meant to be used as an introduction to Molotovs, and how they could be used to clear out infestations. When making your way into the cottage, the player would be able to find some supplies for crafting these items, as well as some Molotovs themselves located on a corpse. The player would immediately be given a chance to use these to clear out an infestation in the next room. Interestingly, this cottage used to have a mirror in it, much like the one found in the final game, where the protagonist could look at himself. Cottage B was a little bit less interesting, however. Located in the old woods, it seems like this cottage served as a safe location, which was only inhabited by pigs. Here you could find a locked crate, which would contain a weird stone and a single-shot shotgun. Half of the code to it could be found on a note in the cottage, and the other half could be found in the pig shed near the sow. However, this has now changed since the cottage doesn't exist anymore. While the second half of the code can still be found in the pig shed on the farmer's corpse, the second part of the code can now be found in the barn, which is located in the village, south of the Silent Forest. When the code is obtained, you can unlock a crate in the barn, which will give you some random high-tier loot, as well as a photo of the sow and the pig farmer. Wolfman Crate Codes. In the Silent Forest, you'll find the Wolfman's second camp. It's a lot bigger than his first camp and includes 3 campfires, rugs, a couch, and a tent. Another thing you may notice are 2 locked crates. Now, you may be wondering where in the game you'll be able to find these codes to unlock these crates, as they must have something good in them. Well, that's just the thing. You can't. These codes are not found anywhere at all during the game, which means yes, you will have to brute force them. A Reddit user by the name of Just Call Me Doc found out that these crate codes will never contain the number 0. So, if we take the total number of combination codes, 10,000, and subtract all the codes that contain the number 0, 1,999, we're left with 8,001 possible combinations. Thank you, Doc, for crunching the numbers so I didn't have to. So, it should only take you a few thousand attempts per crate. Fear not though, there is a way around this. If you're on PC, then you can actually get into the game files and find the codes, or change them so that way you'll be able to access the plethora of guns and ammo inside. However, if you are playing on console, well, good luck. Pellet Gun. The pellet gun was a single-shot pistol which could only be found in the Wolfman's crates. It wasn't that good as a weapon, but could be used to kill some animals like pigs and chickens. However, it was removed from the game in the Alpha 5 update, which was released in 2015. However, some people still claim that they can find the gun, as well as pellet ammo, throughout the world, though there's not really any concrete proof to this. Talking Generator. Probably one of the most unfortunate things that was cut from the final game was the talking generator. This was a generator who had the ability to talk to the player, as the name kind of suggests, and would yell at him to get it some booze, which most likely meant gasoline, in order to keep working. This was most likely cut from the game as it didn't really fit the dark and oppressive atmosphere the rest of the game has. It is a real shame though. Multiple copies of the Cracked Hut Key. Okay, so at first I had absolutely no idea what this entry was talking about, as there are no keys in the game labeled as Cracked Hut Key. There isn't even a location called the Cracked Hut. So after hours and hours of digging and still not being able to find anything, I ended up contacting the Iceberg's creator and just had him explain it to me. So apparently the key is actually called the Rusty Key. Now, you can find this key in a shack near the doctor's house. It's being carried by a madman, who you can kill and then you'll get the key. But you can actually obtain this key much earlier in the game. In the village south of the Silent Forest, there is a house with some sick people in it. There you'll be able to find another madman, who has his arms wrapped around his legs. If you kill him, you'll actually see that he is carrying the same exact key as the other madman had in the shack. This is most likely unintentional, as if the player did this, there would be no way of knowing where this key would go, since you wouldn't find out until much later in the game. The most plausible reason this madman is carrying the same key is because his model was most likely copied and pasted here. If this is true, it looks like the developers just forgot to remove the key from his inventory, hence creating a copy of it. Also, the reason why this is called the Cracked Hut Key in the Iceberg is because that's just what the madman refers to it as. Former ? Location. This location used to be what looked like a giant, near-dead larva. It could be found in the old woods biome, and had a cocoon near it, which could be smashed open, where you could obtain some odd meat. Doing this would cause red chompers to spawn. In fact, this whole area seemed to be teeming with enemies. You can even see the creature in one of the pre-alpha gameplay demos, in what looks to be like an old version of the swamp. Unfortunately, this was cut from the final game, although you can actually still find animations of it moving its mouth slightly in the game files, which makes me wonder why it was even cut in the first place. Weeping Banshee. During the later part of the game, you'll come across a radio tower. Making your way along one of the paths, you'll encounter a non-hostile banshee. Approach it and you'll begin to hear it crying. If you look in front of her, you'll see the corpse of a banshee baby. It seems that the banshee is mourning its loss of what looks to be her child. It would make sense after all, as these creatures along with many others are theoretically part human. Interestingly, this is the only other time a banshee's voice can be heard aside from their screams. Submachine gun. The submachine gun is a fully automatic firearm that uses small caliber magazines. Compared to the pistol's 8-shot magazine, this gun can fire 20 shots. Its extremely high rate of fire makes it really good for taking out banshees and their babies. However, this gun cannot be found in any part of the game. The only way to obtain it is to find it inside one of the Wolfman's crates, which, if you remember, are an absolute bitch to open. Though there is that workaround for PC users. But if you're on console and want to use this weapon, well, I guess you'll just have to start cracking some codes. Church Medallion is an SCP-1875 reference. There is a dream sequence in which the player starts near a church. Right outside, a person will tell you to stand in line. Going into the church and making your way to the back where the altar is, you'll find a trapdoor. You'll then hear people starting to complain about you cutting the line, but don't worry about them, as near the trapdoor is a crate. Unlocking it and looting it will give you a lockpick. You can then use this to obtain entry into the nearby room. After entering the room, you could find a strange box. Picking it up will cause a black chomper to spawn. If you manage to somehow, by sheer luck and God's grace, take out the chomper, he'll drop a medallion. Picking up the medallion, you'll see a picture of 2 children who look to be twins, but the image is wildly distorted. The distorted image seems to resemble a photo contained in the story for SCP-1875. Now, if you don't know what SCP-1875 is, which honestly most of you probably don't, I'll just give you a brief overview of it for the sake of time. So basically, this SCP is a fully automated chess playing machine broken into several parts. The first part is the chess table, made of steel, holding a complex drive shaft. Inside the table is a matrix of 64 electromagnets and a computer made of brain tissue. The brain tissue is from a chess prodigy's 2 daughters. The next part is a set of chess pieces made from the bones of those 2 very same daughters. Another part is a steam engine giving life to the chess-playing automaton, as well as the chess computer, which consists of 5 different speed settings. The last part is the chess-playing automaton, which I just mentioned, which is fashioned out of an old samurai suit. So basically, SCP-1875 is a fully automated chess machine with a computer inside made from the brain cells of the 2 daughters, and a steam engine making it go. The steam engine allows the electromagnet to move the chess pieces, presumably being controlled by the cyborg network of the 2 girls. Well, some tests were done on the machine to determine its chess-playing skills. Each test was done on a speed setting 1 through 4, where the researchers determined that going up a setting was like going up a difficulty level. Then they tested speed setting 5, and here's where it got weird. The machine began making illegal moves at random, and even violently ramming the chess pieces into each other, and just generally going ballistic. 5 minutes after the testing completed, everyone got sent an email containing an image file. This was the attached photo. Everyone who viewed the image experienced a mimetic hazard. It caused them to experience restlessness, anxiety, insomnia, auditory hallucinations manifesting as children's laughter, visual hallucinations, and even self-mutilation. In the end, the image most likely causes the death of its viewers. Pyrocynical using Darkwood OST in videos. Pyrocynical, while being known for other things, is also known for his love of Darkwood. He's talked about it quite extensively, and has done a whole playthrough of the game, which honestly I think he's done a few times, and has also used the game's soundtrack in some of his videos, like his video titled "Do Not Use This File," around 26 to 27 minutes in, for an example. A few months ago, he put out an 8-hour-long video essay about the game, consisting of a full playthrough along with covering the lore and going over some strategies and facts in regards to locations, items, enemies, etc., along with some nicely filmed live-action bits sprinkled throughout the mix. All in all, it's a great video, and one you should check out regardless if you like Darkwood or not. The Tumor. According to the developer's Reddit AMA, Their forum moderator suggested an idea for some sort of tumor that would sit in the player's hotbar and talk to him, possibly reacting to certain key events or characters. The developer said they enjoyed the idea, but nothing would ever come of it due to it being too complex to implement. Not much more to this entry, it's pretty brief. The Orphan. The Orphan was a cut character who would have played a central role in the game's plot. Apparently, he was supposed to be the player's only friend and know something about your past. He can actually be seen in one of the pre-alpha trailers having a conversation with the protagonist and playing the piano. His appearance somewhat resembles the Elephant Child in the final game, which he would most likely become in the end. Piano Concerto No. 19 in F major, K 459. In the Silent Forest, you'll come across a location called the Silo. Entering the place, you'll hear distorted orchestral music playing through something called a bambino gramophone. The song that's playing is Piano Concerto No. 19, written by Mozart. Specifically, the first movement, Allegro, is the portion that's being looped. This is a pretty fitting song for the place, as it's one of the places you can find the musician character. Darkwood Holdout mod. Holdout is a mod you can download which adds a new game mode to Darkwood to spice things up a bit. This mode turns the slow-paced, atmospheric game into a fast-paced tower defense wave survival type game. In this mode, you're confined to one hideout, located in the swamp biome. You'll have to survive wave after wave each night until the morning. When morning arrives, you can speak with the three, who will have an entirely new interaction when it comes to trading. You can buy furniture, upgrades, and abilities. Every night gets more challenging than the last, so make sure you've barricaded your hideout thoroughly, because when night comes, you'll be too busy fighting off hordes of monsters to repair anything. If you haven't checked out this mod, I highly recommend it. It's extremely fun, especially if you've run through the game a few times and are looking for a change. Cut Amphibian Enemy. In the second pre-alpha gameplay trailer, you'll briefly see a creature which cannot be found in the final release of the game. It resembles a humanoid with amphibian-like characteristics. You can actually find some concept art of it in the official art book. This creature would eventually evolve into the Swamper, which is in the final game. However, looking through the game files, you'll come across sprites that resemble the cut creature in one of its frog-like forms. Doctor at Banshee Camp. The Banshee Camp is a location that can be found on the outskirts of the swamp. A hidden pathway next to an overgrown combine leads to a canyon with a fallen tree, serving as a bridge. Crossing it will lead you to a dark meadow that houses a banshee and several of her babies. If the player has visited a camp near the entrance to the radio tower, the doctor can be found here the following day. He's curled up next to a figure made out of mud and sticks, with a shiny stone as its head, possibly made to resemble his daughter or wife. When approached, he will slowly crawl back to the campfire and grab a torch. He'll then get up and attack the player with it. If he's killed, you'll be able to obtain the doctor's notes, which show his descent into madness and his true opinions of the protagonist. I should mention that this interaction can only be done if the player has failed the train sequence dream. Musician living with the chicken lady ending. Much like this entry states, there is an ending where the chicken lady adopts the musician. To achieve this ending, you'll have to unlock and open the door to the pretty lady's room, then complete the musician's quest by killing his parents and then killing the pretty lady. You'll also need to obtain the bliss ending as well. Meeting all these requirements will present you with an ending transcript about the chicken lady. It stated that due to the loss of her sister, she fell into a deep despair, although because of her sadness, she grew closer to the lonely boy with the violin. Wanting to fill the void after her loss, she took the musician in under her roof and tended to him like she tended to her sister. Closure of Acid Wizard Studio. Well, we finally come to the last entry in the Iceberg, and unfortunately it's a somewhat somber one. On August 7th, 2023, Acid Wizard Studio would take to Twitter, I'm not fucking calling it X, to give their thanks to everyone who had played their last release game, Soccer Kids, as well as to reassure people that they were finishing up the 1.4 update to Darkwood. However, they would go on to announce that after finishing the update, they would go on an indefinite hiatus. They claimed the reason for this was because they weren't able to create a work environment that wouldn't be destructive to their personal lives, saying that their families were their top priority and shouldn't be negatively affected by their work. They claimed that it might be possible for them to return within 5 to 10 years when they, quote-unquote, got their shit together. However, it isn't entirely all bad news. The studio claimed that they weren't disbanding or disappearing, as they said that they would like for their games to live on. The post ended with them claiming that they were talking to other people about handing over the Darkwood IP to potentially make a sequel, and also continue working on their newly released game, Soccer Kids. Well, that brings us to the end of this iceberg and subsequently the end of this video. I want to give a big thanks to Harrison Woolard for helping me out and actually letting me use his iceberg to make this video. And if you've stayed till the end here, I want to give a big thanks to you as well. Now, even though I just spoiled pretty much everything, I still implore you to check out this game. Even if you're not a big fan of the top-down perspective, I was the same way until I ended up giving this game a shot, and it has become one of my favorite horror games of all time. Not only that, I truly think it's one of the best horror games ever made, and I would put it up there with the indie horror giants like Cry of Fear, Outlast, and Amnesia, just to name a few. I really hope more people find and try this game out, because although it does have a decently sized fan base, I feel like it definitely doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. Even though a second installment of the game would be pretty hype, I think the game stands tall on its own. And finally, I'd like to thank everybody at Acid Wizard Studio just for making such an amazing game and actually taking their time to perfect it. Oh, and if I got anything wrong or incorrect, please let me know in the comments. I'd like to know what some of your theories or explanations might be on some of these entries. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and if you want to see more of me, please like and subscribe. Until then, take care everyone.